Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's session of our RAS Back to School Boot Camp. Today, we will be talking specifically about some safety ideas for your transportation staff. And I'm pleased to welcome Craig Fink, who will get us started here.
All right, thanks, Kelly. Welcome everybody. This is our fifth and final for our back to school boot camp week. Excuse me, and we're going to talk a little bit about transportation staff. Um, I'll just share a little bit about myself. I'm a loss control consultant with RAS here uh, I'm in Iowa. I say here, but we're going to talk about this for the next 45, 50 minutes or so. And if you've got questions, comments, you can always put those in the chat and we can take a look at those. And if something pops up, we can answer those when we get to the tail end of this. We'll go ahead and just get rolling. And so what are we talking about? Who are we talking about? So this is really focused on transportation staff, but that's kind of a broad spectrum. So who's on the bus? Drivers, paraprofessionals, aides, coaches, teachers. That ends up being a gargantuan majority of education staff. So this has an opportunity for everybody in the education industry to be a part of this. But I'm a huge why person. So as we go through the presentation, I wanted to be able to share with you why we're talking about this. And part of that is understanding what the most common staff injuries are. And so the number one is struck by. And as we look at struck by, a lot of times that struck by is around challenging behavior. Number two is slips, trips, and falls. And then we've got sprains and strains. And we got motor vehicle accidents. That's the MVAPs. And so then why is this happening? And how do the goal is really how do we talk about how to prevent these kinds of injuries? So here at RES, we've got a wide variety, excuse me, a wide variety of different industries that we work with. But in the education industry, I wanted to kind of pull the data and kind of focus on that. So we've got over 400 organizations that fall within education. And those can be public schools, private schools, universities, colleges, those kinds of things. But as I pull that data in and we look at what the injury causation is, struck by far is the largest number of injuries. And so if we take a look at the data, we're looking at approximately 60% of the claims that we have in education are struck by. And if we focus on our transportation portion of the staff, about 900 of the 3,000 are in the transportation industry. So it's a substantial portion of the injuries that we have. And we want to focus on that. So we want to be able to understand the why and also how do we get that to prevent. And when we talk about struck by injuries, there's a lot of different things that go into struck by. If we look outside of education and other industries, construction, for instance, if you were to talk about struck by would not really be a challenging behavior injury. It might be struck by an object or a piece of equipment. But we really want to focus on what's causing within education. And so when we do that, we know that the large majority of those 3,300 struck by injuries are what is reported as fellow worker, patient, or other person, or by staff injured by combative patient. And when it says worker, patient, other person, in education, what we really are meaning is typically struck by students. It might be coworkers, it might be others, but we know that that challenging behavior, as we call those combative patient or the other person struck by, that ends up being over two-thirds of the struck by injuries in education. So that's kind of the why of why we want to focus on that, but we also want to focus on those other causations, are slips, trips, and falls, and strains and sprains, and motor vehicle accidents, because you've got opportunity or exposure to all those hazards within transportation. So if we go collectively, kind of a global perspective around what actually causes incidents, we know because in the safety and loss control industry, insurance as well, there's been all kinds of data that's been collected over decades. And if we take a look at that, we know that unsafe behaviors are the largest portion, 80 to 95% of incidents, what causes incidents. Beyond that, unsafe conditions falls into 4 to 19% or so. And then if we go outside of behavior and conditions, we've got what some folks call acts of God or acts of nature, and that only is a really small percentage, 1 to 2%. So that tells us as we look through the data, what we really need to be focused on is the behavior piece. How do we understand what that behavior should look like, and maybe what unsafe behavior is, and how we get to safe behavior? So as we look at that pie chart again a little bit, what are some examples of those three different types? So unsafe behaviors in the transportation portion and education can be improper securement of yourself or of passengers. It can be not paying attention while driving, so unsafe driving. It can be poor, not having a good attempt to de-escalate some unsafe behaviors or the challenging behavior. It could also be not pausing or slowing down enough to identify the hazards. And that's probably one of the most common behavior struggles that we see anywhere in safety and loss control, no matter the industry, is slowing down enough to identify the hazards. Um, and another example for unsafe behavior might be, and we see this in injury causation frequently, is not holding on to the rail while going in and out of a vehicle. 3 points of contact are important. So unsafe conditions can be wet steps, tripping hazards that might be not visible. Maybe it's in a parking lot when there's snow covering a parking median. It could be a student who you know has behavior struggles, and potentially things like snow and ice. And we look at that; those are unsafe conditions, but then it kind of rolls up to the behavior. How do I deal with the conditions with my safe or unsafe behavior? And then we find that really small category, the acts of God or acts of nature, where severe weather, flooding, lightning strikes, things that we can't control and we might not see coming. We might not understand that those are coming. Oftentimes we know there's lightning going on, but we don't know the lightning's going to hit close to us. Or we know the flooding's happening, but we don't necessarily understand that the flooding is going to occur when we get off work, the parking lot's flooded, those kinds of things. So we know we can identify the hazards, but we have this tendency to not look at the behavior portion and our decisions. Um, Oftentimes, when we look at unsafe conditions, we just assume that those conditions are going to be controlled, or we assume that those conditions are going to change. But our behavior really needs to be the change that we can control and we can do. So I don't do a lot of quotes from people, but as we get into the challenging behavior that seems to really drive the struck by injuries that we see in transportation, is I just like this quote, so I pulled it in. But challenging behavior is just a signal, the fever, the means by which a kid is communicating that he or she is having difficulty meeting an expectation. And that just kind of rang a bell for me. How do we control that? Or how do we control our behavior and how to prevent injuries from these challenging behaviors? And we know that challenging behavior can be things like overtired, overstimulated. It could be a youth or a student that's caught by surprise. It could be somebody that's confused, unable to understand you. These are things that we can't necessarily control, but we can control how we relate with them. We also know challenging behavior might look like folks that are embarrassed for certain reasons. They are scared, they're angry, they're frustrated. And again, these are things that we may not be able to control as those behaviors start to bubble. But we should hopefully be able to recognize them and have a good understanding of how we prevent these things from triggering a challenging behavior that could cause an injury. Excuse me. Sometimes, again, these are things we might not control, but how do we recognize challenging behavior? It could be somebody that's in pain, their natural fight or flight response is occurring because of emotions are releasing, which can be, sadness, anger, all those things. It could be instinctual. When something happens, they are going to always fight or flight one way or the other, right? And so again, recognizing and understanding the people that we are interacting with frequently or commonly, so that we understand what we need to do to try to prevent the challenging behavior becoming some kind of a struck by injury. And this is difficult sometimes because I think we all know for sure, not necessarily in the workplace, but we know what verbal cues are when somebody's angry because they're going to tell us, right? But nonverbal cues can be a struggle sometimes. And so understanding what challenging behavior looks like from a nonverbal perspective can be one of the best things for us to look at and slow down enough to recognize and then process how we deal with this. Nonverbal cues can be things like the labored breathing. What does their expression, facial expression, actually look like? Um, Clenched fists, are they clenching and unclenching? And restlessness. So, are they playing with their hands? Are they rocking? Are they moving? And I will share. I've got a large family, and these are things from the parenting perspective that I didn't know and recognize as my parents be or as my children became teenagers. And those are things you got to learn when all of a sudden a young person has some of these nonverbals, right? I knew when my teenagers were mad verbally, but I didn't understand for a while when they were not. So we want to be able to look at that. Um, so understanding what the teaching team is seeing, and in the transportation industry, we might not be interacting with those students very frequently. It might be daily. It might be, to and from school activities, other things, but it might be we don't see this person all of the time, where the teaching team might see that person, every day. So making sure that the teaching team and the folks in the transportation portion of the day are consulting with each other. So they know, what needs are likely to be expressed, what those needs are and how they express them, excuse me, what those triggers might be, um, and how you can get the student's attention before the challenging behavior becomes something larger. Um, what kinds of things that student may need around interaction, verbal interaction, movements, slow movement versus fast movement, loud versus soft, slowing down conversation. Those are all things that we might not know because we don't see the student often or often enough to be able to understand that. So moving forward, the second most common injury in transportation portion is around slip, trips, and falls. And so as we talk about slip, trips, and falls, if we were to look at uh, the workplace, this is one of the most common, if from a visual perspective, that we see in the workplace. Right. So this is one of those things where, in my experience as a safety and loss control person for the last 25 years, seems to be the most visibly obvious, but it still is usually the top one or two causation, injury causations that we see in the workplace. So we see it, but somehow we don't always manage to control it. So what we know for slip, trips, and falls is the most common is walking and working surfaces. So um, objects that need to be clean, moved, not around, identified, with signage, labeling, whatever we need to do. But the walking, working surfaces usually are where our trips happen. Um, Footwear is the second most common from slips, trips, and falls. And we'll talk a little bit. We'll see some things about footwear here in a little bit. Hazard warning. So in a school environment, education environment, that could be having the proper signage for wet floors, having the proper labeling for what might be on the floor or what that traction looks like. And then in a small portion, 8% is training and education. So understanding how we can get this in front of folks frequently. When I talk about behavior frequently, and that's one of the most common subjects that we talk about around preventing any kind of injury, is the fact that we're human. And so because we're human, we have a tendency to make assumptions about ourselves, about our behavior, and the best way to have a positive impact about our choices and behavior is education and training around how to deal with the hazards. And then fraud is a little percentage there where oftentimes we see people that say, well, I fell and I have this injury because I tripped over this thing. And making sure that we understand and doing a good investigation can help when people are maybe talking a little bit and making things, exaggerating things. What was the actual cause? They'll tell you like the floor was wet, and actually the cause was they just weren't paying attention and they tripped over something that, portion of a walkway they maybe should not have been walking in it altogether. So that would be the fraud piece. Um, but let's talk about a little bit about footwear, because this is one of the easiest things that we can control. So making sure we wear the proper footwear. There's all kinds of things on this screen that are, kind of several of them are maybe a little goofy looking that we wouldn't wear typically in the workplace, like Crocs and those athletic shoes that have the coiled up heel piece. But um, there's also things that we know we see more frequently, like an athletic shoe that has a rocking rubber sole. That seems really good for a lot of reasons, for maybe distance walking, but it's not the best way to prevent a slip, trip, and fall. Rubber soles, making sure the rubber soles have treading on them and the treading's not worn down, and things like very nice looking, like the bottom center photo, a very nice looking dress shoe that has a leather sole, because the leather soles are not slip resistant at all. So just making sure we've got better footwear than that, understanding how important that is for what the bottom of our shoes actually look like. Making sure they fit properly, making sure um, that we have closed heels, so our footwear can't slip off is also important. Some proper footwear that is advised, like wear something that fits the work. What are you doing? What's your day look like? If we look at different staff uh, occupations within education, we know that we've got staff that maybe is in the kitchen all the time. So we know what their footwear should look like. And slip resistant footwear that goes into an environment like that might not be the right footwear during the winter for going outside to get on the bus. Um, or vice versa, some of the footwear like we look at in these pictures with lugged soles that are really good for some of those kinds of environments outside with the rain and the snow, they might not be the right type of footwear and environment when we come in the building. So just understanding wearing the proper footwear and excuse me, being engaged enough with that and understanding what the hazard can be, where changing the footwear if you need to. And that's one of the things that we oftentimes see people say, like, I went outside and I knew I should have probably put something else different. I was snowing and I slipped. Um, so just understanding of what that proper footwear might be for what your day looks like. Um, for for those of you that might be outside frequently, especially during severe weather, winter weather, there's all kinds of different options for winter considerations. Things like Yak Tracks, GripX, devices called stabilizers, understanding what those look like, but also understanding that there's really nothing on the screen right now um, for this type of footwear where you should continue to wear that when you come inside. On a tile floor, on a concrete floor, these can be as slippery as walking with a smooth sole on the ice. So just understanding what that looks like, understanding if you're wearing a device like this, your foot can slip off the pedal, the brake pedal and the gas pedal. It can be hard to get in and out of the of a bus or mode of transportation with footwear like this. So making sure that's understood. For those of you that might drive all the time, that's what you do maybe. There are some footwear devices like Grips footwear where there's things that can prevent that slippage from while driving on the pedals. They also can increase traction on snow and ice. They're not necessarily as good as something like a Yak Track device, but they are better than most typical rubber soles. And the nice part is you can also go in and out, walk on that tile floor, walk on a concrete floor to go in and out of the building and still be able to drive safely. So there's some options there for the grips devices. And not that I'm trying to sell this or we're trying to sell this at all, but there's some websites that you can go to and look at some options for pieces like the grips and the grips light and have those available to slip on your footwear um, and be able to take them on and off relatively easily. Some additional winter considerations because we do understand that during cold weather, winter, snow accumulation, freeze and thaw, we know that it's not just the footwear. There are other things that we want to make sure that we're keeping track of and identifying and doing. So sprinkling sand, sprinkling a sand salt mixture, um, having those in the parking lot areas where vehicles are parked, where traffic is going on and off of the transportation, and also making sure that that's around the entryways, the doorways, and things. And part of that is also making sure that there are places when you come inside of those buildings to get that sand and salt mixture off of your footwear with proper floor mats. To be able to kind of brush your shoes off to make sure that one, there's not wetness being tracked into the building, and also sand and salt, especially when the salt's granular, it can be a slip hazard as well. So making sure about that. It's not just the footwear, it's other pieces of slip trip prevention in the winter as well. I've always thought a little bit when I first heard, and I can't remember how many years ago, it was quite some time ago, when we talked about, started talking about thinking like a penguin or walking like a penguin. but understanding what that looks like. So it doesn't mean that you've got to get your toes out and you got to necessarily waddle, but walking slowly, taking short steps, keeping your stance wide. Doesn't have to be beyond shoulder width by any stretch, but keeping the stance wide, walking with flat feet, and making sure that you're putting your feet down in a cautious, controlled manner and not striding, having long strides, heel down, those kinds of things. And keeping your hands out of your pockets. There's the injury prevention is so much better when you have your hands out of your pockets and you can try to slow down or prevent the fall if you do fall. Not to say that anybody wants to have an arm out. If they do slip and, catch themselves and that can hurt other things like a wrist or a hand or a shoulder even. But it is better than slipping and falling and having a head injury potentially. So that's being able to kind of catch yourself and slow that fall down if it does happen. Hopefully it never happens. The other piece about hands out of the pockets is it gives you opportunity to reach out to grab something. If you have something that you can grab to slow down or catch the fall, and also you can put your hands and arms out to balance. And sometimes that's what we need is just to get our arms out to try to get that balance properly if there is a slippery surface. And from the Think Penguin perspective, if you don't have signage or different things you can hand out, you can reach out to RAS because we've got a lot of options, or you can go to the to the RAS portal and you can download some of these things as well before winter starts. So you can, have some education and some things to share with staff, particularly if oh my gosh, we just don't, we seem to see these happen all the time during the winter. So there are some things you can share there. Some extra winter considerations depending on where you're at, what, kind of how you deal with snow and ice at your location. But making sure there's extra caution near the runoff areas where the melting, the ice and the snow and the water go. This is very common depending on what portion of the winter we're looking at. But making sure we watch out for that refreeze, that ice. And in this picture particularly, it's really hard to see where the ice starts and stops versus any wetness or pure water versus ice and the snow itself. And so we can't rely on I see the ice necessarily because it could have glare. We just might not be able to tell which is which. So making sure that we understand how we can control this, and then watch for snow and ice clumps. Um, if we have a buildup and we have clumps because it was not cleared or something, is on the walkway and refreezes, it can be hard enough to be a trip hazard. So making sure we identify and clear those walkways. There's a little bit of a picture of the watch for snow and ice clumps, what those trip hazards actually look like. Particularly that picture on the right. There's all kinds of things there between ice, water, and some refreeze on that curb that you're not going to go through. You're going to potentially have a trip hazard. So some other trip prevention best practices that we want to share is not winter related, but make sure if we have to step over something, that we lift our foot high. Ideally, we don't have any of those hazards, but occasionally we know we do, particularly in a school environment. We know there's going to be things within our vehicles. Maybe that's where we lock down or tie down the wheelchair itself. It can be the footrest of the wheelchair if we're dealing with that. It can be things that are laid on the floor, which is very common in that environment. Things like backpacks, sweatshirts, all the other lovely things that we find that the, students may leave on the floor, or can fall off seats and whatnot. But making sure that we identify that and try to clean that stuff up and get that organized. Maybe telling the students to do that, or before the vehicle starts rolling, if we're in the vehicle, making sure that that's identified and picked up before we start rolling. And that picture, that's a hazard we should hopefully never have, is a cord in the workplace. That's a trip hazard like that, but it's easy to say never. It's really hard to make sure that actually never happens, right? So identify it and understand how to control it, and or control your behavior to step over it. Other environmental trip hazards, things that can be hard to fix. So heaving concrete, uneven concrete, potholes, all those things that can happen frequently outside of the building. And the important part here is identifying these, right? Because we know there's not a quick fix for the things we see in these pictures. It might be, yes, we want to patch some of these potholes. Yes, we want to get the sidewalk evened up. But if we identify that and it freezes again, we might not be able to get that work done for some time, or it's possible that there's a large cost to get some of these things repaired, and that cost is going to have that job pushed out for a while. So we've got to still walk in this environment, still have students and staff walking in an environment. So making sure we recognize a hazard. Um, that yellow paint on that hazard is one of the best ways to identify it. You can also use signage. That could be a freestanding sign on the walk itself. It could be a sign that's installed. So we can try to identify those hazards before we're able to actually get them fixed. And the other piece is, with some of these hazards, is making sure that we report them to the proper people when we identify them. So it's pretty frequent when somebody trips and falls over uh, uneven concrete or a pothole, and you've asked them, "How long did you know that was there?" And it's most often they knew they've seen that before, but making sure that we report that and we follow up on that to have people not walking over those hazards all the time. Um, so around very specific to the transportation group is, how should we safely and can we get safely in and out of the vehicles? So having 3 points of contact is very important. Making sure that we are not carrying things in a way we can't actually support ourselves with our hands. Making sure that there's a good handhold to get in and out of the vehicle. Making sure that our feet are well positioned, that we're actually using the steps properly, not just kind of having our toes kind of going on the steps, get the feet completely on the steps. Making sure when it's wet and cold, particularly, we use extra caution, we're paying better attention. And stomping our feet or wiping our feet to get inside, and then when we do get inside of the vehicle, having a way to clean the feet so we're not walking. If we're going to be going up and down the aisle at any point in time, we don't have on our feet wetness, or as little wetness or ice and sand and snow and mud, all the other things, getting that cleaned up. Making sure if there is some damage or something loose, part of the tread or the railing or anything else, that we report that. And if it's not safe to get in and out of the vehicle, making sure that there's a plan to either get that repaired or be using a different vehicle, so that we can eliminate the contact with that hazard. And I know the last bullet point seems to probably be one of the most obvious ones, um, but never jump out. Um, that oftentimes happens when the vehicle has to be parked where there's standing water or mud or snow and ice. That might not be where the vehicle is always parked, but maybe it's when somebody's transported to a different location, a different building, a different school, those kinds of things. And now you have to get out, and oh my gosh, there's just gargantuan mud puddle. Um, and again, we'd like to think that nobody's ever going to jump off the bus, off a piece of equipment like that, but it does happen. So we'll move on to the next most common. So is that strains and sprains. And this is a large variety of different injuries, but we know that strains and sprains can happen from lifting, pulling, pushing, but the most common seems to be in the education environment, particularly, is lifting proper lifting techniques and understanding how we can lift to prevent these injuries. So, um, making sure that we keep our back straight is the top reason or the top method to prevent the injury, but also making sure that we bend at our knees and hips, making sure that we keep whatever we're lifting in close to us, and making sure that we are square, squaring up our shoulders and our feet in the same direction, making sure that we don't quote unquote do the twist. So twisting at turning while we're lifting or carrying, turning to try to reach for something in a method that's going to put force on our upper body while our feet are still standing in a different direction. So if we want to keep a straight back, making sure that we have our chin up, making sure that we keep our ears over our shoulders, so head and our eyes are facing in the direction, so we're not turning side to side. Having our shoulders over our hips or having them point in the same direction is going to keep our spine in the right direction. And it says keep a straight back. Obviously, our spine is not straight in every direction, but making sure that we get that into the most relaxed position. And so doing things or not doing things like we see in these pictures where it does what we call a C-shaped spine, where we're not using our knees and our legs to bend it down or to lower ourselves down. We're just bending over at the waist. And as we bend at the waist to try to pick things up, that always causes our spine to curve in a direction that's going to have a negative impact, and it's a hazard that can cause an injury. So we don't want to round our neck, shoulders, and back because we know that increases the stress level. And you can see in the two pictures that we have on the screen, we're picking this item up from the same item from the same position, but on the right of the screen, that person is using their knees, they're using their legs, and they're crouching down in a manner that does not cause the curvature of the spine. So it greatly reduces the stress level on our spine to try to prevent these kinds of injuries. We also know we want to try to bend at the knees and hips. And in order to be able to do that, we need to have a wide stance. We need to have our chin up. Oftentimes, it might be looking above, maybe where we're trying to do things, at least glimpsing above, and not necessarily we have to have our eyes to the ceiling, but looking up. Soften or bend the knees, not doing any kind of interaction or lifting with our knees locked, and we want to bend at the hips. I know the phrase having your butt out sounds kind of silly, but having your backside kind of out also helps get you balanced a little bit. So making sure your hips are bent and making sure that you're not trying to have your feet together, your hips together. It's okay to put your feet beyond shoulder width if you're going to be crouching down and being able, wanting to safely pick things up. Also making sure we keep the weight close. So regardless of the weight, regardless of how strong we are or we tend to think we are, right? Making sure that anything that we're lifting, interacting with, manipulating, putting force on, we try to get our hands and our arms tucked in as close to ourselves as we can, to our torso, to our chest. Um, because 10 pounds doesn't sound very heavy until it's out at arm's reach. And then we know that that multiplies, it drastically multiplies what that force is on our spine. And the force in our spine also gets into our hips. And that can be the causation of some of these strain and sprain injuries. It also has a tendency to be forceful on your shoulders. And we do see a lot of strain and sprain injuries from lifting that occur in the shoulder region as well. So we go back to this picture where somebody's trying to assist somebody that's in a wheelchair, right? Being close to that person makes that allows us to make sure that we're not reaching out and we don't have that multiplication factor because the weight is in close to us. And I know we sometimes have this tendency where we don't necessarily want to be that close to the individual, but we want to be able to prevent the injury. So we are going to have to get as close as we can. This is a portion where we want to understand what's that person okay with as well, right? Making sure your nose is over your toes, making sure you stand up tall, and then crouch down using your legs. Those kinds of things are going to be extremely important to keep that weight close to us and the force close to us as well. So as we look at that transfer, so transferring with the, excuse me, with the wheelchair, making sure that we communicate too. So having the person that we're assisting understanding, okay, we're going to move on three and then counting one, two, three. Um, Making sure that the wheelchair brakes are locked. Some of these things seem like we should know better or we do know better, but we also know again, we're humans, so we forget things, right? Using a gait belt. So we know if we use a gait belt to get a people or person moved or transferred, that gait belt is going to have more force on the belt, less force on us. So we're not having to lift as much. Also, understanding before you do any lifting at all, making sure you understand that you've got a clear, safe path for your feet. Um, because sometimes lifting, if we don't have the path cleared, we don't have the trip and fall hazards cleared out, then our strains and sprain injury also becomes a slip, trip, and fall type of injury. And we can have all kinds of different things happen. Every body part, if you slip, trip, and fall while lifting, could potentially have an injury. So we want to try to prevent that as well. This is an extremely common injury causation for strains and sprains while lifting, while pushing and pulling, while moving any kind of object or assisting a person with movement is this twisting that we do of our upper body versus our feet. And within every industry, particularly where I've worked at, I've always told people your feet were made to be walking and moving. They were made to be lifting your feet up and moving them into the position you want to. Your body was not really made for you to be twisting your shoulders and keeping your feet still. But we still have this tendency to keep our feet kind of in one position as we pick up and lift and twist and then set down. We try to grab something and we twist our shoulders or turn to the side without moving our feet. And that is really one of the biggest injury causes that we have for our lower back, our hips, hip flexors, all kinds of things. So we want to make sure and tell people your nose and your toes should be pointing in the same direction when you're lifting, making sure that we're not doing this twisting like we see in these pictures. So we know we want to try to get healthy muscles or use our healthy muscles, particularly when we're lifting, because that's the best way that we can prevent strains and sprains. And so, in order to do that, we have to understand what strength, how we can deal with our strength, how stretching falls into that, and what healthy habits should be. Right. And so our strength is oftentimes we think that we're stronger than we are. And as we age, unfortunately, our strength has a tendency to go down. And that's really, really hard to increase strength as we get older. That's part of it. And then stretching, understanding why stretching is important, and then some healthy habits that can be positive and have positive influence on our muscles. So we'll start a little bit with stretches, making sure that we have a stretch that's based on need. We don't stretch aggressively, slowly move into the stretch. And then when we do stretch, stop and hold, excuse me, while feeling that stretch tension and hold it for steadily for 2 breaths. Avoid bouncing. And then if you feel pain when you're stretching something, try to soften that tissue. So maybe not stretch it just as far, or maybe just you have to discontinue. It might be something else that's going on, but we don't want to overstretch things. So, um, and we've got some stretch examples here on the screen. And this the person that's in these pictures is wearing a high vis. Looks like a construction worker, but these particular stretches can and should be done in any workforce. So making sure that we reach back and we stretch, um, and we do shoulder stretches, the wrist flexors, sitting down in a chair and just crossing your leg, putting your foot up, maybe on your knee to try to be able to stretch that hip, um, doing the hip flexors, the hamstrings. These are all the types of stretches that are important for us to try to do in the workplace. And we would highly encourage that the stretches are done at the start of the shift, at some point during the day, maybe a lunch break or going back to work. And I tell folks all the time, when you get done with work, maybe still at work or when you get home, stretch again. If we think of ourselves as occupational athletes in the workplace, we might not be doing the same kind of athletic work that maybe an NFL player does or a basketball player, right? A professional athlete. Um, but we do know that we get injuries. We get the same kinds of injuries that people that are athletes get. Usually we get more injuries than professional athletes get. So we know that stretching is one of the best ways to prevent that, and it's the thing that we can control the easiest. Because if we want to increase our strength, that requires a lot of work and a lot of time. Stretching is less time, and typically, as particularly as we get older, is more effective. So we want to move into the fourth reason or the fourth causation piece, which is motor vehicle crashes. And we're talking about transportation staff here. Motor vehicle crashes are actually a smaller portion. They are in the top four for the causations. So we did want to have a little bit of discussion about the defensive driving and decisions, knowing that there are other things that tend to be more frequent for NG causation. But when we have motor vehicle accidents that are have injuries, they tend to be not necessarily as frequent, but they tend to be more severe. So we want to make sure that we understand that our decisions can drive and have an impact on motor vehicle accidents. So making sure that are making good choices about taking risks. That could be understanding the forecast, understanding traffic, understanding what our route looks like, making sure that we don't drive too fast for conditions, we don't tailgate, making sure we're looking out the windshield to judge other people's speed and have a good following distance. And also understanding that we don't want to follow too closely to road hazards, whether that's construction, whether that's traffic, whether that's pedestrians, whether that's going in and out of the school where we've got all the kids and all the parents potentially interacting, just understanding those and then recognizing how we should be dealing with that. Um, there are some recognition errors or potentially things that we can be cause have causation for motor vehicle accidents. So caused by cognitive distractions, are we thinking about driving when we get behind the wheel? Or are we thinking about something that happened before we came to work or happened during the workday, right? Interruptions of driving attention and concentration. The biggest reason that we have issues with inattention is electronic devices, cell phones. So making sure we are not getting distracted by those things. Um, Other interactions can be our passengers themselves. So making sure that we've got some method of identifying and controlling those kinds of things. Performance errors, so making sure that we rack properly, that we don't panic, that we don't swerve, we don't slam on the brakes, making sure we understand from a driving perspective of what we should be doing to drive safely. I This is not a defensive driving course, but having people that are in transportation and particularly doing the driving or a staff member that is on those vehicles, maybe not the one that is driving, but also have them understand what defensive driving should look like and doing that training regularly. Um, non Critical non-performance errors, so things that are not necessarily defensive driving. How do you deal with this? But not being impaired, not using drugs and alcohol. And when we talk about drugs, that could be prescription medication, making sure that doesn't have a negative impact on our ability to understand, identify hazards, and then control those hazards. Understanding, are you drowsy? What's that? How's your day going? Did you get enough sleep? Those kinds of things. And poor driver health. Nobody wants to have an impact on their ability to do their job because their health might impact that. But understanding some things, and we might not have any ability to control any of it, some things may impact our ability to be a safe driver. Again, this is not a defensive driving course, but knowing that we want to be able to have enough reaction time to prevent an incident or an accident. I hate to call them accidents, but a motor vehicle crash. Have a proper spacing, be aware of blind spots for the vehicle you're driving, avoiding distractions, understand the road conditions, mostly driven by rain, right? But it can be other things. Um, Making sure you properly decrease your speed, and typically we want to decrease our speed by 33% or a third when it's raining or pouring, and then decreasing the speed and increasing our following distance when it's foggy or snowing. Those are all things that are very important for safe driving. So, do want to go down what our key points were. So, we want to make sure, in order to prevent the most common injuries within the transportation industry, we want to make sure we practice defensive driving. We want to make sure we watch for behavior warning cues around challenging behavior. We want to make sure that we're wearing the proper footwear. Um, Understand what trip hazards are and watch out for those. Not just watch out for those, we also want to make sure that we try to correct those if we identify those hazards. Stay on our feet. Think about walking like a penguin when we have winter hazards. Lifting, strains and sprain injuries. Make sure we're using our back properly. Keep our back straight. No twisting, no slumping, no picking up things or lifting without bending our knees. Make sure that we do bend our knees, and we want to crouch down using our legs, knees, and hips, and making sure that we keep that weight tucked in close. making sure that we're healthy and we're stretching. Try to be healthy from that's a broad spectrum, but um, try not to do things that have that negative impact on your health. And hopefully, if we can control some of those things, think about those, identify the hazards themselves, we can see some of those more frequent injuries go down and be less frequent. That's the goal, right? Because we know we want to prevent struck by challenging behavior interactions that cause injury, slips, trips, and falls, strains and sprains, and motor vehicle accidents. Um, so want to thank everybody for being on the call, or if you're on the call on the webinar, or if you're watching this, a recording of this, thank you very much. And we thank all of you for everything that you do. And we're happy that you're here to share this topic with us. And a couple of things before I leave, and we close down this is if you want to see this or if you want to share this in your workplace, you can go to the RAS portal and there'll be a recording of this. And you don't need to log in. Nobody needs to have a login. You can click that and you can share this with anybody in the workforce. And we'd love for that to be shared. If you've got questions or uh, challenging behavior, something that we talked about that you'd like to have more information about, you can talk to your RAS loss control person. You can reach out to your contact RAS and we can get you engaged with one of our loss control consultants. Teresa Parrish is the person that we have in loss control that has the most experience and does a lot of work with challenging behavior prevention. So we can get you in that direction as well. And then we would love it when we close down this webinar. If you're on the webinar, you will see that there is a survey that you can go to the survey and fill that out so you can give us some information about what you liked or maybe other topics that you'd like to have us present, or if you have any other things that you would like to share with us, we can do that too from the survey. So thank you very much. Appreciate it, everybody, and hope you have a great weekend. Thanks.